Good morning and welcome back. We could ask everyone to take their seats, please. In 1936, a gentleman named Walter S. Schmidt envisioned an organization that would be comprised of businessmen with knowledge, experience, and a common philosophy on the American city, urban growth, and urban decay. That organization became known today as the Urban Land Institute. And that vision continues today under the leadership of Patrick Phillips, ULI's Chief Executive Officer, whose career in the economic analysis of real estate and land use has spanned more than 20 years. Therefore, it's only fitting that Patrick lead our next session entitled A Conversation with Urban Visionaries. Please join me in welcoming Patrick Phillips.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back, as Rick said. It's a delight to see you here this morning. It's been a real treat as the CEO of ULI to watch the ULI Asia Pacific Summit move beyond the successful first year into what's appearing to be a very successful second year. We're looking forward to the future of this particular summit. It will, as John mentioned earlier, become a fixture on the ULI calendar, right there with the European Paris Conference, with the ULI spring and fall meeting in the United States. So, welcome. We have an outstanding panel here today. I've been looking forward so much to this, and I wanted to thank Rick Vogel for his insights and vision in assembling the group of people that we have for you this morning. Rather than have me stand here and introduce them with a long list of biographical details, we thought a more compelling, visually interesting, and more personal introduction might be better. So if we could roll the video.
The Urban Land Institute is proud to present a forum for three of the world's most visionary and successful urban planners and builders. Vincent, Thai-Ker, and Larry Silverstein exemplify the goals of this organization. They have each provided a lifetime of leadership in the responsible use of land by creating and sustaining thriving communities. Vincent is the chairman of the Shui Group, a company he started in 1971 with a 100,000 Hong Kong dollar loan from his father. Mr. Law grew his business into property development, construction, and construction materials with interest in Hong Kong and the Chinese mainland. Headquartered in Shanghai, Shui Land is the flagship property development company of the group. With a history of large-scale, mixed-use, city-core redevelopment projects, the company is known for its total dedication and commitment to the China property market. Following its first investment in the Chinese mainland in 1985, the company has evolved with the rapidly changing market. Shui Land is currently developing over 13 million square meters in 8 projects in major Chinese cities, enough for 10 years of development. Mr. Law is known for preserving the characteristics of old buildings while blending in cutting-edge design and decor.
Shillong's Shanghai Xintiandi project was completed in 2001. It's a redevelopment of Shikumen, a group of early 20th century buildings. To turn historical buildings into commercial projects involves large-scale restoration work. Construction period could be 3 times longer than normal.
The most important thing in life is to reach out and touch perfection. 意思就係人生最重要呢，就係你盡力去做到最美最好。咁而家亦都係我做事嘅我嘅座右銘。
One of the world's leading architect planners, Thai-Ker is best known as the father of urban planning of Singapore. As chief architect of the Housing Development Board from 1969 to 1989, he oversaw the completion of over 500,000 housing units and cleared over 280,000 squatter huts, creating new homes for over 1.3 million people. At the same time, he formulated a vision for the current and future urban development of the city.
We were not just solving housing supply issue,
we are creating communities. As I travel around the different parts of the world, including Asia, America, and so on, what the government has laid a foundation for us to acquire land, to resettle people with relative ease is something that we must be very mindful of.
As chief planner of the Urban Redevelopment Authority from 1989 to 1992, he spearheaded the major revision of the Singapore Concept Plan and key direction for heritage conservation. Since 1992, Thai-Ker has been director of RSP Architects, Planners and Engineers, a multidisciplinary firm of over 1,600 people with 18 overseas offices and projects in 19 countries. He is a member of several governmental bodies in Singapore and is a planning advisor to more than 20 cities in China. Born in New York during the Great Depression, Larry Silverstein spent his entire career shaping and improving neighborhoods. In July 2001, Mr. Silverstein completed the largest real estate transaction in New York history when he purchased the World Trade Center, only to see it destroyed in terrorist attacks 6 weeks later on September 11. He has spent the last 12 years of his life rebuilding the office component of the site, a $7 billion project designed by some of the world's leading architects, including David Childs, Norman Foster, Richard Rogers, and Fumiko Magi.
One of the things that is uppermost in my mind is assuring continuation and the ultimate achievement of the build-out of the Trade Center. That's issue number one, passion number one in my life.
Larry and Claire Silverstein have been married for 57 years and have 3 children, 2 of whom are executives at Silverstein Properties. Several years ago, Mr. Silverstein brought in Martin Berger to take over the day-to-day operations of the company. Silverstein currently has $10 billion worth of development activity in the pipeline, including 2 Four Seasons hotels, projects in Eastern Europe, and here in China. Please join me in welcoming 3 urban visionaries, Vincent, Thai-Ker, and Larry Silverstein.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, come on up. English. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So, to get started, those are illustrious careers, long illustrious careers. Obviously, each of you has dealt with a great deal of complexity in this project. Complex politics, complex site conditions. We were talking earlier about the complex emotional issues associated with trade and redevelopment. We had the last Asia Pacific Summit a year ago, of course, and one of the attendees at that time, Gary Hack, a noted urban designer and planner from the United States, made an observation that he expects development in China over the next few years to become more complex, but to produce better outcomes. Now, I remember that comment after all these months, and I wanted to start by revisiting. Again, as folks who've been involved with a great deal of complexity over your careers, particularly some of the signature projects that were featured in the video, what is, in your view, the relationship between complexity of process and quality of outcome? Are they necessarily linked? Put another way, must great projects be so damn difficult? I'm going to start with Vincent Lowe.
The first project that comes to mind when you talk about complexity is the Xintiandi that you saw in the video just now. 16 years ago, when I was trying to decide what to build on that site, it wasn't easy because it was right next to the first Congress Hall of the Communist Party, so it's really the Mecca for China. And the reason why we have to preserve those Shikumen stone gate housing is because the party wanted to preserve the ambience and environment. And all these stone gate housing, it's actually a unique architecture for Shanghai, but it's really quite outdated. It's not suitable for living or working in this day and age. So having to preserve them poses a very big question for my company. But we've decided to, okay, we'll preserve the facade, but basically renovate and rip out all the interior. But that was a very new concept for Shanghai and for China. Most people did not know what we were trying to achieve. And also, when I said we wanted to preserve the exterior, it's easier said than done because those buildings are all so dilapidated that they can fall down any time. So we have to decide how do we preserve them so that they really look healthy and can last. And then what usage do we put in to the buildings? So that was a big question mark. And then it was also during the Asian currency crisis. I went to the banks to ask for a loan. The banks did not say no to me. They were very kind to me, but they did not give me an answer either. And at that time, we have to start working immediately because 2001, there was two important events in Shanghai. One is the APEC meeting in October, and the other one is the 80th Communist Party anniversary on the 1st of July. So our target was to complete the renovation by the middle of 2001. So we had to start working immediately. So at that time, I had to decide, no bank loan, what are we going to do? So I had a discussion with my colleagues. I said, okay, we will have to find a way to fund this. And my colleague said, oh, sorry, there's no money coming anywhere else. You might want to use your own money. So I made that decision, okay, I'll use my own money. But I asked my finance director one question. I said, if this project is going to fall apart, am I going to go bankrupt? He said, no. I said, then go ahead. And then trying to decide on Xintiandi. Of course, today it looks very attractive. But at that time, we were debating how actually are we going to try and do the design. And I asked my Shanghai friends, I said, we want to try and introduce alfresco dining and, staying outdoor for you. And they all said, sorry, we Shanghainese, we don't go outdoor. But I thought, well, once you have a taste of the good life, you will be hooked. So we decided to go on that. And then the other biggest difficulty for us was trying to do the Xintiandi, and then it's right next to the first Congress Hall of the Communist Party. We were so concerned and worried that if some of the senior party members were going to come and condemn this place, what are we going to do? So we have to really put on a very extensive lobbying program to make sure that they understand what we're trying to do. And that's complex enough.
And plenty of challenges. Did the project benefit from those challenges?
Yes, because we put in so much time and effort. Even every small break that we put back on, we have to actually import some adhesive from Germany to make sure that the brick will stay in place. And actually, 80% of the buildings you see in Xintiandi today are new built, but they look very genuine because we put in so much effort into it.
Let me turn to you, and I ask the same question. What, in your view, is the relationship between complexity and quality of outcome? Does it have to be this difficult?
Before I answer the question, I'd just like to express my appreciation for the invite to Phillips to extraordinarily illustrious. We're familiar with the accomplishments of both. They spent a lifetime doing some extraordinary things. But I will tell you, recognize what they've accomplished its impact on people, not just here in the Far East, but people around the globe. I have to say that you have to bless them, because obviously they had their passions fixed on doing some great things for the world. And like others, they've accomplished it in magnificent form. So I feel privileged to be a part of this. I hope that I thank you. Complexity, I think, a necessity goes with quality projects. Does it have to be that way? Not necessarily, but somehow always seems to be. Projects of consequence, projects of size, projects that affect people's lives, somehow become extremely complex. I had the misfortune of terrible timing. 6 weeks prior to 9/11, I acquired the Trade Center. Okay. 9/11 happened, changed my life, changed the life of people around the globe. We suddenly found ourselves with 18 acres of prime real estate in the heart of Lower Manhattan. And the question came, what do you do with it? Well, it was the financial locomotive for the financial district of Lower Manhattan, which was a hugely important part of the city. And it became obvious to me quickly that somehow this had to be replaced. We just couldn't let it sit there and lie fallow. And so among my first thoughts was, okay, what do you do? You have a clean sheet of paper. What do you do with it? How do you do this? How do you do this in a way, in a fashion, that people will be benefited by it, that lives will be affected in a positive fashion? So obviously, first thoughts, development. What and how and where, to what extent? Well, 3,000 people lost their lives on 9/11. And many of those people, many of those families they found themselves without remains of any kind. Why? Because their loved ones were vaporized on 9/11. Right? So without remains, there's no burial. Without a burial, there's no closure. So talking to people, talking to the families and loved ones, how do you build on their sacred land? How do you build on the areas where they disappeared? What do you do? It became an enormously complex emotional issue, which you could not discuss in rational form because the emotions ran so high. They were so passionately felt. And my life was spared. The lives of my children were spared. We did lose 4 employees, but there were 3,000 lives that were affected. The impact on families was huge. And so that issue became one that I quickly realized I couldn't possibly handle. Fortunately, the government decided to come in and take responsibility for that. If they didn't do that, I'm not sure where we'd be today in Old Canada. So that was an issue of major magnitude. Of course, once government took hold of that, they began to run with it and did a very incredible job, first class. I will tell you, however, that when government gets involved, things begin to happen. Some of them positive, the case I just described, and others not so positive. So, for example, time value of money, not part of government lexicon. No comprehension whatsoever. Didn't know what I was talking about. What difference did it make? It took longer, it took a year, it took 2 years, it took 5 years, it took 10 years, so what? Wonderful. Except that I was paying $100 million a year on ground rent. And this ground rent would continue without any abatement whatsoever, because that was my obligation under the terms of the ground lease. Very foolishly, I signed a 99-year ground lease at the age of 70. And I was a little optimistic when you know that I should have. But no one anticipated a World Trade Center disaster, and therefore no abatement. So therefore continuation of ground rent. So the issues became extraordinarily difficult and complicated and took years, literally, to resolve. So all during that time, I said to myself, the only way we're going to get something going here is by building the 7 World Trade Center, which is the building that I owned prior to my negotiation for the acquisition and therefore second apart. And no lives were lost in that building, fortunately, because it was the last building to come down on 9/11. So by virtue of the fact that no lives were lost, totally separate, independent lease from the ground lease that I signed for the Trade Center, I found myself in a position to go ahead and start that building. So I went into the ground in 02, and by 06, and I finished building. Leased, financed for 40 years, done, enormously successful. And suddenly government sat up and said, "Jesus, how'd you do this? How'd you accomplish this?" And so I would say it wasn't easy, isn't easy. But what I learned from that experience is that if you do want to do something, it's got to be the best you can possibly do. Because A, the world is looking upon you as to what you do and how you do it. B, you want to know that whatever comes out of the ground the second time around is far superior to what developed the first time. And C, they want to see you do it with a degree of sensitivity to their needs, to their requirements, to their quality of life. And so these are issues you take into consideration to a degree that perhaps early in my life I never did. And so it's part and parcel of the experience, part and parcel of the realities of life.
It varies in point. I just want to emphasize that in your particular set of circumstances, there was a rational conversation and an emotional conversation, and those actually needed to be, because they were untranslatable, they needed to be handled by different parties. In your case, the rational side, which you demonstrated the concept through 7, and then the government
Exactly.
on the emotional side.
Yes.
Thai-Ker, you bring us a public perspective. You have to deal with complexity in all of its public dimensions, lots of different constituencies, but with very important, clearly set out goals in the case of Singapore. How do you look at this question of complexity and outcomes?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for putting me in such a distinguished company. And I was inspired by the 2 stories of both gentlemen. Both of them are seeking for perfection despite the complexity of modern life. I think it's totally inspiring. Now, when we talk about complexity, at the same time, in the Asian city context, I'm talking about city. We're talking about size. The modern cities are very, very large, with very high density, and that partly contribute to, or rather principally contribute to, complexity of urban issues. What are some of the issues, like heavy traffic, the need to build expressways, industries, the need to have pollution control, and large buildings, because actually, just let you know that we have become immune to the issue of large buildings. But when I was a high school kid in Singapore around 40s and 50s, when a local development built a 7-story hotel, it went to the news. And it was the tallest building, the tallest hotel in Singapore in those days, 7-story. And unfortunately, it's not preserved, it's now gone, which is a great pity. So, because when I was in public housing and had to deal with high-rise, high-density housing, the average would be like 12 stories, but occasionally a few went up to 24 stories. As an architect, dealing with those large buildings, I had to learn new skills in order to make them, on the one hand, not creating or not exaggerating a sense of congestion, because, but at the same time, you have to make them look interesting. Basically, just simply put to you, when you deal with large buildings, high-rise buildings, you are dealing with elephants on the dance floor. And you don't let the elephant do rock and roll. You have to, that would have been disastrous. And in the early phase of Singapore, we did try to let those elephants dance rock and roll, and that was just terrible. So I have to kind of pull them in and put them in line, but with a little bit of variation here and there. I'm saying this as a small example. The challenge of dealing with large buildings in the modern world is something we don't talk a lot about, but it's creating new complexity that we must try to solve. So basically I want to say that yes, complexity is a good thing. Complexity in another sense is a good thing. That means when you have large cities, you have better gathering of talents, better assembling of finances, resources, and also better ideas for development. That makes complexity very good. But the largeness of a city is not automatically good. You really have to find ways to deal with it. So basically, in my view, because of the large size of a city and its complexity, it would be very desirable, as we experience in Singapore, to have a government that successfully took the lead to move the city in a direction that, as we look back, turned out to be a good one. So, to put it metaphorically, I feel that every city, even including American cities with all your democracy, probably need to position itself to create, if a city is a large stage, then the role of a city government is to create a perfectly functioning and beautiful stage in order to create opportunity for the citizens and businessmen to act out the most exciting life drama. If the stage is imperfect, it's difficult to act out exciting life drama. So the issue of good and bad, I think in terms of the non-hardware aspect, it's probably going to be good because with all the gathering of talents like the assembling today, it could not have happened in say, before the Second World War. But there are huge challenges on the hardware side of a city. So we need to look at the city issues from the viewpoint of software and hardware and other. I've kind of spent all my life dealing with hardware. And how hard is hardware? Just put it very simply, that I guarantee all of you that in the future, there will be two types of cities in the entire world. One type of city where the cars drive on the right-hand side, and another type on the left-hand side. This is hardware. You can't change it. And that shows that this is just roads, but if you get other things to be done wrongly, it's very hard to change. Even if you have the resources to change, you're going to create a lot of wasted materials, you're going to consume more energy, and you're going to make the world a worse world. And that means you're hastening the problem of the warming of our globe. So basically, I think while we should remain optimistic to say the complexity is good, but we must be aware of the huge danger lurking behind it.
You draw an interesting distinction between complexity versus ambiguity. Complexity isn't necessarily bad if it's relatively predictable in terms of process and outcome. In your view, the last couple of decades of success in Singapore, does that reflect that? Is there a policy framework that is less complicated but relatively predictable or non-ambiguous?
Yes, as a player of modern cities, you have to look at things from various angles. Take up my experience in public housing, for example. We plan along the principle of the British European New Towns concept. But the first thing I had to do is to conduct an interview when I was in 1969. Interview on what is a new town suitable for Singapore. So I interviewed people in the health, etc., in running emporiums, etc., etc. And then came to the conclusion that whereas in UK, the largest new town in those days was 69,000 people, we had to plan for 250,000 in order to create a self-sufficient new town. So that's already, self-sufficient means that within the new town, you put in all the essential basic amenities, so people can shop there, can go to school there, can go to local clinic, can do the sports there, etc. Also do the worship in their various religious buildings. Now, so this was one aspect of being circumspective when you create a new community. But at the same time, I had about a dozen sociologists with PhD degree to advise me. So I'll ask them, what makes a good neighborhoods? Cut a long story short, say, well, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 families. But actually, up to then, the concept of urban hierarchy would be city, new towns, and neighborhoods. But I felt that it was difficult to create meaningful communities at that size, a neighborhood size of 17 hectares, or maybe 200 acres. So I went back to the sociologists. I said, well, what is the next lower unit? So they told me that, well, maybe we should think about precincts, which would be like 3 to 5 hectares, or like 8 to 12 acres. Because when you create that, you actually create a territory which is small enough for people to feel that they own that piece of territory. But 50 hectares, they don't feel that. So there's an emotional tie to the precincts. And we also made a point to create only one access, both for vehicle and pedestrian, into the precinct, so that whenever they come in and out, they look at each other's faces, even though they didn't know the names of each other, they recognize the faces. They feel that they know the neighborhoods, and so on and so on. So if we want to create a city, even at a low scale, if we think in terms of the kind of wide range of issues that would make people feel that they live in a city in a comfortable way, in a livable way, with good environment, good functionality. That makes the job of a planner very complex, but it makes a city's life very simple.
Let's move on to the issue of leadership. Before I do that, I just want to note that my intention is to ask our panel a couple more questions, and then we're going to turn to you. So it's important that you start to get your questions ready, because I'll expect the last 15 or 20 minutes to be available for Q&A. So start thinking of your question. Meantime, we'll turn to the issue of leadership. All of the experiences you've described, I think, were related to leadership. Leadership is the core of ULI's mission. Leadership in the responsible use of land. What I wanted to ask each of you, in your own experience with leadership, you've obviously demonstrated leadership. Is leadership a function of power or persuasion? Vincent?
I don't think we developers can claim to have power. We have to deal with so many different stakeholders, particularly in a place like China. Basically, you have to convince the government to agree with you or support you, otherwise there's no way you can get your project going. But we do have to provide leadership in the sense that we should look ahead and say, okay, what is required? And we have to do the right thing. And I always preach to my people that we're building on this land. It's not just for us to make money. I said it's important that in 20, 30 years' time, you bring your family and you can plainly tell them, we did that. I think that's important.
So creating, I was going to ask you a follow-up, which is how do you teach leadership? How do you cultivate leadership in your team?
It's not easy because we're in a very competitive world, and we have to deliver. We have to improve on the bottom line all the time. So sometimes you do have to sacrifice a bit of long-term thinking for the hopefully immediate or medium-term results. And that, I think, is a balance that we, as head of an organization, will have to decide.
And I imagine, in the course of your career, that there were times that the chaos would continue unless you made a decision, unless you demonstrated leadership at a critical point in time. Can you think of what you took away from that kind of experience?
Many times, because I think probably my colleagues all think I'm crazy half the time in making decisions to build a Shinkendi or build a KIC, which you will be visiting tomorrow. But I do feel that we have to contribute back to society, and so building a KIC, it's because China and Shanghai in the early 2000s wanted to enhance growth, economic growth, through technology and innovation. And at that time, the slogan for the country is 科教兴市, 科教兴革. And I asked them, okay, what exactly does that mean? How are you actually going to put that into practice? And they said, oh, Mr. Low, why don't you give us some suggestions and proposal? And I thought, well, okay, then if we want to do that, we have to build something like a Silicon Valley in China. And so we undertook the project in Yangpu, KIC, with 14 universities around, and it's starting to show some results. But that takes quite a bit of courage and leadership. I have a lot of resistance from my colleagues and from our bankers, from everybody.
Larry, you're from the capital of both power and persuasion, New York City. Which have you found more useful?
I think it took me both. When we had the 9/11 experience, what became obvious to me instantly is that the code, the building code of the city here, pursuant to which the Trade Center had been built, or modern buildings were built, was sadly lacking in a range of areas. And so, because we saw the need of moving forward with Central Trade Center quickly, we put together a group of engineers, leading engineers from around the world, studied what happened, and determined how best to rebuild these buildings with a totally different standard, much higher standard, life safety considerations, which we decided to embark upon and do. Now, costly? Sure, much more costly. Is it something you have to do notwithstanding? I thought so, because I don't think you measure life in terms of dollars and cents. Very huge. It's our building. We're going to move back into it. Got a couple hundred people working for me. They're my extended family. I got my children working for me. They're my family. How can you put people back into something that isn't absolutely perfect when it comes to making it foolproof, making sure that sequential collapse can never happen again? So I said, okay, let's go. Let's do what we have to do. And we did it. The bankers thought I was crazy. Several other people thought I was foolish. Bottom line, you sort of have to move aside to some degree and say, hey, this is what we have to do. You just have to show that leadership. Government looked at me and said, why are you doing this? I said, because there's no other way to do it. I can't justify any other way. End result, look at what we did. Decided to improve, to raise the bar of the building code of the city yard. They improved it. Did they go as far as they should have? No. But at least they went significantly farther than where they were before. So did we accomplish something for everybody's buildings in the future? Yes. Will they be safer? Will they be better? I say absolutely. That's before you get into green issues, sustainability, design, and so forth. But just in terms of life safety factors, hugely important. So it's a combination of you need some pressure, you need that, you need the ability to convince. And at the end of the day, I think privately, because they would admit this to me, I don't believe we're privately. I think that they're really very pleased at what we did, because the truth of the matter is it benefits everybody, it benefits all occupants of office buildings in the future in a very significant way. Is that positive? No question.
It's interesting how you characterize that through such a personal lens. Your employees in the building, family members in the building, the care you take for the tenants in the building. Yeah, ultimately, it's less about the building and more about the outcomes.
Oh, absolutely.
So I guess the same follow-up question that I asked Vincent in terms of building a successful organization and leaving a legacy of leadership. How do you try to cultivate leadership in your senior managers?
First, I think you cultivate leadership by example, by doing. Speaking is one thing. Telling is one thing. But doing it sometimes is a lot more difficult, right? And a lot more challenging.
Oh, like raising children.
Like raising children. And so you set example, you set by example, by doing, by executing. And so to the extent that they see your involvement, they see your attitude, they see your passion, they see your predilections, they see your sensitivities, they feel it. Ultimately, hopefully, it rubs off on that. When I look back at my children, now grandchildren, because I see they're following in our footsteps in a whole myriad of ways. Makes me, throws me to pieces, right? And so, that's life. That's part of my challenge and part of my responsibility. So, from my perspective, I think what you bring to it, I always tell my people, it's the most important thing, easy way to live. Just do unto others exactly what you would have them do unto you. Right? Okay. Treat them exactly the same way as you want them to treat you. It's simple. It's not a big deal. Number one. Number two is one other factor. Most important factor in your life is your name, your reputation, your integrity. That's it. End of day, right? So whatever you leave in the world, whatever material possession you come out with and so forth, ultimately, not consequential. What's consequential is your name and your reputation. What is your standard? What will people judge you by after you're long since gone? What will the other people think? And that's the way you have to function. So if you have difficulty, should I do something or should I do it? Well, very simple. I say do the New York Times guest. If you can print it up on the front page of the New York Times in bold italics and not be concerned about what you're about to do, go ahead and do it. But if you have any concern, forget about it. It's simple. Right? Very simple standards. So this I think is part of leadership.
These days it might be a tweet, right?
Maybe.
Thai-Ker, you worked for a government that had a substantial amount of power, and in some cases exercised it, of course. How do you view this question? And importantly, is the relative mix of power and persuasion shifting in city building?
First of all, I think we're looking at two excellent issues, and I'll take on from that. I think in the government, it's important to say, first of all, your leader must have ideas, if it's an excellent leader, ahead of time, and have the courage to implement it. But courage is not just blind courage. It's a question of whether it's an issue of whether you have to think through what you want to do. And if what you think through and what you believe that you should do is not fashionable, then you have to have courage to proceed. I give you just two quick examples. Say around the 1960s, when our government did some calculation and decided that the only way for us to solve housing problem so that we can achieve home ownership for all was to go for high-rise, and it's 12-story average. Now that was totally unfashionable around the world at that time. So when we did that, and I was in a job, I used to get strong criticism. People would come to Singapore and say, "Wow, I feel sorry for you. You're building a slum for the future." Well, but that was also the friends to me, and that was very useful because then I said, "Well, what could be the factors that would cause the building to be a slum?" So we did a lot of research to say, well, if you remove these problems, you're not going to get a slum. And so it was through research that we actually got rid of the weak points in high-rise residential building. And the second story, just quickly, is that our government believed in putting in the infrastructure first, make the city work first, before we talk about the sexy buildings. So until around between 60 and 85, every time my good friend from overseas come to me and say, "Oh, Thai-Ker," I said, "Your city is so clinical because all the excitement is underground. You don't see anything on top." So I said to I was young then, I said to my younger staff, I said, "Ignore what they say, because I don't want our city to become a Disneyland. Although I do enjoy Disneyland, but not living with it all the time." I said, "We must create real cities." And I said, as long as we get the infrastructure done right, the roads done right, and so on, eventually the city will become lively, as it has proven to be the case. So what is my view about leadership is, first of all, you must have a sense of mission. Second, you must dare to think ahead of time in order to break through. Third, in thinking through, you must be clear that what you want to do is making sense. So, you see, when Lee Kuan Yew was the Prime Minister, he was only about in his mid-30s, and I used to wonder, where did he get the courage to implement high-rise buildings when the whole world was against it? So in the end, after thinking for 2 to 3 years, mind you, I discovered that what he did was clarity equals courage. And then this has been a guiding principle for me too. Once I'm clear about what must be done, I will just go ahead and do it. And I think that's where you can make the breakthrough. And I think both gentlemen did that too in their projects.
We could probably extend the equation, and clarity equals courage equals leadership, or clarity plus courage equals leadership. Very good. All right, now it's time to turn to the audience, which I'm going to do, but I'm also going to reserve the last few minutes for a little bit of a closing question. Based on your schedule, we may be running a few minutes late. I've been assured that the only thing between the conclusion of this session and lunch, actually nothing is between those two things. So we're going to go a little bit longer, but we'll take questions for 10, 15 minutes. And I hope that you spend a little time thinking of them. And if I can peer out, here's our first question, right over here. Yes, sir.
I'm quite impressed by the variety of representation that the panel brings with experience in 3 great cities. My question is, how, moving forward, how would the panel describe the challenges in the differences in the challenges in doing development between, say, North America, Southeast Asia, and China?
Who wants to take that on? Thai-Ker, you might have the bonus.
I will have a go at it. Whether you are in Asia or in America or Europe, I feel that for the city to do well, you need to just boil it down to absolute basic elements. Three things. One is that the city government must have the right value for the city. That means you must understand what are the things good for the city. It's not just economics, it's not just sexy building, it's got a whole lot of other things. You must understand what it is, so I call it value. But then the planners must be capable of two types of skill. One is to know how to assemble the city together like a machine. Now, I deliberately use the word machine to cause discomfort among other people. And because the city at the end of the day is a machine, because if you want to put a master plan together with all the different land uses, you must know what are the land uses you must put in. You must know how much of each type of land use. You must know how big is each land. You must know how to assemble together. It's like putting a machine together. But the third element is you must have the aesthetic sensitivity and the feeling for the city, city's history, city's natural environment, city's terrain, in order to make the machine to work well with the city. So value, science, and arts. Now, if you still disagree with me, which I expect many don't, I would say this. When you buy a car, you're looking at these three things. That means you're looking for user-friendliness to drive. That's a value. You ask yourself, would the machine be reliable? That's a science. And you then, if these two things are okay, it's about how does it look. If it looks nice, then you buy the car. And the city basically is a huge piece of industrial design.
Vincent, do you have anything to add on the differences?
Well, maybe let me try and focus on doing development here in China. It's going to be very, very different from the rest of the world and even inside China. Because of the very fast development of the market, it's constantly changing. It's very challenging. When I first came into the Chinese mainland in the 80s, like CY was saying, he had to help create the land sales auction tender document. But now, in this 20-odd years, it's moved so fast. The market has changed so much, and the purchasing power is beyond belief. We're seeing people, still 1/3 of my buyers coming to buy from us are paying full cash. They don't even need the mortgage. In the savings account, in the banking system, it's over 100 trillion. That's almost 1.75 times of GDP of last year. And that's not even including the cash that most people stash under their pillowcase. So the market is moving so fast. So how are developers going to cope with it? And then also the intervention of the government. Because property prices has been escalating quite dramatically in the past few years. So the government introduced very stringent measures to try and control. Like, for example, in Shanghai, every family can only buy one unit. But in the past couple of years, we're starting to see people going through divorces to buy a unit. How do you deal with that? But that's the China market. So I think developers will really need to think ahead and say, okay, how exactly are you going to do this? And then with the rapid urbanization in China, how is that going to change the market? What exactly is the government going to do? Are they going to build a lot more subsidized housing? Are they going to leave it to the market? Every new leadership coming in will have new policies. And I expect this new leadership, likely in the autumn, they will come up with their own blueprint of exactly how they're going to be taking the country forward.
Larry, anything to add on the distinctions between North America and China?
I think what we've heard is very real and genuine. And I think what I first came here in '93, and what I've seen in the various trips that I've made since then have been numerous. There's continual change, but change at a pace, at a rate that is mind-boggling, far in excess of what we see back home. The drive, the campaign, drive the economy, move it forward. Obviously, has taken root to such a degree that But I understand that there are more people living in urban centers today than on farmland. And if that's the case, can you imagine what's going to happen for tomorrow? So the pace at which things are going, I find enormously exciting, very stimulating, tremendously challenging. And will it be excitement and challenge for tomorrow? Not a doubt in my mind. And to watch this will be part of it. I think it's going to be a very exciting opportunity.
You know, given the pace of change, is there any way to mitigate the risk associated with that, given the time frame of the real estate development, or do you just move as fast as you can?
You just have to move as fast as you can. But the risk factor, I think, is not that high in China at this stage because the property market is only just starting, and the economy is still going to continue to grow at 7 to 8%. And we all know property is location, location, location. As long as you choose the right site, you can't go wrong.
Next question. Yes, ma'am, right here.
Good morning. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and particularly your thoughts on leadership. One of the things that I really think about a lot every day is the idea of sustainability. And I'd like to ask you, I know all of you have touched upon it in your own way, but I'd like you to talk a little bit more succinctly about how sustainability can help Asia's urban transformation and how you see that from a personal context in your own personal search for beauty and perfection. Thank you.
Great. We'll start with Larry. Sustainability.
Sustainability has become a hugely important part of our lives as developers and as human beings. What we have in terms of our environment is absolutely precious. And clearly, people are beginning to comprehend the importance of that. And as a result, to the degree that we have today, we've never had before a focus and a concentration and a comprehension of the importance of our environment and sustainability of design and what we do and how it's going to impact the environment around us. And being sensitive to that has taken on all kinds of parameters. And the changes that are taking place as a result of it, changes in attitude, changes in personal predilections, changes in major corporate entities. I signed a lease with 800,000 square feet, 80,000 square meters, as we say here. And got to know after the lease was signed quite well. And I said, so tell me, how has it been? He said, Larry, he said, my absenteeism is down by 1/3. He said, this is such a better environment. The quality of the air we breathe, the amount of light that comes through. He said, it's a totally different existence than we had before at our old corporate headquarters. I said, had I known that, I would have charged corporate. But in truth, what clearly has happened on many occasions is tenants today, prospective users, are now knowledgeable. They're sophisticated. They're comprehending. They understand the impact on their people, which is number one, impact on their people. And so, by virtue of that fact, what they now do is scrutinize if there's competition, and there is, and competition all around us on a continual basis. Fact of the matter is, they look with great care to determine whose building has what, who provides the most advantages from an environmental, from a sustainability standpoint. Carbon footprint today becomes a factor that people now consider seriously. And we see tenants, large-scale tenants, making decisions based upon exactly those factors. They are concerned about it. They want to know its impact. They want to see how it's going to affect their people. And when they employ 5, 6, 7, 10,000, 20,000 people, it makes a big difference for them. So clearly, this is today a factor that's much, much more in front of us than it's ever been before, and will continue to be so into the future.
So markets have been transformed. What about on a larger scale, at a city scale, neighborhood scale?
Yeah, I think sustainability can be applied to many areas. Of course, economic activities must be sustainable. Ecology must be sustainable. The use of energy must be sustainable. The creation environment will be with minimum
conflicts or make it sustainable. So it is quite a broad issue.
That sounds like basically planning, too, doesn't it?
It is the creation of not only a livable city, but a functioning city. And also, I think the highest order of things is to create a place or a city where our planet Earth would survive. That's the biggest issue.
More questions? Yes, sir. Right here.
Good morning. Thank you again for all of these inspiring thoughts. My question, I guess, is as we're looking at imaginative thinking for cities, and talking very forward-thinking about it, are there certain threats to how we develop the cities of the future that we should anticipate?
I believe, for example, China is going to urbanize another 20% of the population in the next 20 years. That is going to be a major challenge, because how exactly are these cities going to look like? I don't know. Are we going to build all new cities, or are we continuing to just expand the mega cities? Shanghai is already 23 million people. How are we going to expand? And I think it's going to be a very, very difficult issue. But I believe the Chinese government is thinking hard about it. In my mind, I think going forward, the city planning should be flexibility, walkability, sustainability.
Big challenge.
Okay, just make one point. Since we're in Asia, I have done a simple mental calculation. In China, to reach 70% urbanization plus upgrading the quality environment, China has built 3 Americas from now on. That means every single city you have in America, you reduce 3 down. That's not the end of the story. India has to produce 5. Okay. And Indonesia has to produce 2. So altogether, 10 Americas. If we get it done right, the world will be a much nicer place. If we get it done wrongly, we're all going to be in deep trouble. And that is the seriousness of urbanization and the importance of getting it done right.
As a summary of the risk for the challenge. As I mentioned, I'm going to hold the last question for my own moderator's prerogative. I'm going to spring this on you, gentlemen. There's a phrase that captures a long-standing value that ULI has as an organization. And it embodies the notion that we share what works, we share what doesn't, we're open and transparent. And the phrase is, mistakes made, lessons learned. Now, I want to just get a sense from each of you if there's something you can point to where you made a mistake, you learned a lesson, you applied it in the future. Mary, start with you.
Made many mistakes. And we continue to make them. Because, in fact, we're always learning. The day we stop learning, forget it, might as well fold up shop and quit. But in point of fact, it's easy to look back and see where you did not use or exercise the best judgment, right? Where you modified that path that you took. And clearly, as a result, the buildings I build today are vastly superior to the buildings I built yesterday. And it's my hope and my expectation that the buildings we're going to build tomorrow will be even more superior to those we're building today. I think people today are entitled to lead lives that are better than the lives they led yesterday. I think people want to have an experience, in our case, good experiences, that are full, that are rich, that provide them with the benefits and the joys of life. Give them surroundings that give them happiness, give them quality of life, give them culture, give them clean air, good food, entertainment, the ability to relate to each other, to function with each other, and to enrich their lives in a way that's important to them. Because to the extent that our city dwellers are happy, it's going to make life for all city dwellers much, much better. And I think the communities that we will have developed and worked so hard to improve will be that much better for it. So looking back, mistakes, a ton of them, learn from those mistakes as we go forward.
Thank you. Mistakes made, lessons learned.
We all learn from our mistakes, but we also learn from work that we did, which were not necessarily mistakes, but not good enough. But in today's world, when the consumption and the investment volume is so huge, and the materials employed is so fantastic today, I think it would be necessary for us to take the attitude of not making mistakes, or making as few mistakes as possible. And just give you one concrete example. In our public housing in Singapore, we have completed about over 1 million units of apartments. And so far, we have found it necessary to pull down only 5,000 to 6,000 units. And that is a huge saving of resources. And that's the kind of attitude I feel that we should take.
Very good.
Patrick, maybe let me look at it from a totally different angle, from a business and organization point of view for myself and my company. I've always been driving the company myself and wanting to create or build all these landmark projects with innovation. But how is this going to be sustainable if I decide to step back? Is Shui going to be able to do this? And also, we've got to look at it from the economic point of view and say, why should you spend so much time and effort in building these landmark projects when you can easily make money doing other things, multiple things? So these are questions that my organization, including myself, will have to address.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking what I thought was an extraordinary panel today. We really appreciate it.